Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Geoff Mosher, product owner and team lead of API First portals for API consumption. I've been with Verizon for 8 years, exclusively in technology and product development. Prior to API First, I was a product manager supporting Verizon Cloud and a variety of TPD product innovation initiatives.
Hi everyone, this is Anamika Rashmi, Technical Product Manager API First. I come from a long history of software development background, started my career as a software developer, then took on the journey of end-to-end product development and management. 2022 was the time when I decided it's time to go back to school, went to Cornell, got my MBA, and started my association with Verizon in July 2023. And since then, it's been hell of a ride. Over to you, Geoff.
Thanks, Anamika. Anamika and I are here today to talk to you about how API First is improving discovery of software capabilities across Verizon. Yesterday, August 13th, our colleagues Alex Childs and Ed Ropel provided an overview of our platform and its components, including tooling for developing APIs and the producer portal for delivering them to API consumers. They also defined APIs and explained how they're used in software development and why they matter to both businesses and consumers. So building on that, APIs, which stand for Application Programming Interfaces, are software intermediaries that enable computer programs to communicate. They follow established contracts and they return responses to request received. So in the metaphor of a restaurant or a food delivery app, an API is the waiter that receives the order from the patron or the customer, communicates that to the kitchen, which is the server in this example, makes or processes the order for the waiter or application to deliver to the customer. In case you're not familiar with what I meant by contracts, that could mean several things, but commonly that's methods for exchanging data between software applications and servers. Also, things like authentication and authorization methods that are required for that data to be exchanged. Developers use APIs to build new applications and to make existing applications better. Developer portals make it easier for developers to find, evaluate, and use APIs. Those three verbs define the API consumer journey, the user lifecycle of the API hubs. Now, I've been using the plural hubs because there are, in fact, two API hubs that API First has developed. Both are places where APIs come alive in self-service UI tailored to developers. So internally, a year ago now, we launched the API First Hub. That's the screenshot I have here on the left. You can go here now or anytime at apifirsthub.verizon.com. You can log in with your Verizon SSO credentials. We also recently launched an external version of the API First Hub. We just shorthand that to API Hub. And that has a slightly different login, but if you want access, you can email my team and I at this API Hub at Verizon.com email address, and we can get you login credentials. So I mentioned the 1-year anniversary of the API First Hub. We now actually have more than 50 APIs on this internal API developer portal. It's increasingly integrated with our platform for runtime automation and self-service functionality. Earlier this year, the API Hub, the external version, was integrated with Identity Orchestrator for external access, so we can start to have partners come in and access API documentation. I'll show a little bit of that in a second. Now, before I walk you through how the hubs satisfy the consumer journey, I just wanted to bring up this slide. I'll try to come back to this and point out some of these features that we're augmenting throughout the year. But this is the consumer journey from find to evaluate, joining or subscribing, using, getting help, and then leaving. I'm going to focus today mainly on discovery, but also two related aspects of the journey that we have a lot of features around: evaluation and usage. Now I'm going to go to the API Hub. Okay, you should be seeing the homepage. So the homepage is where discovery begins. The hero emphasizes the convergence of usable APIs and software applications. The latter connects with the former APIs to help solve real-world problems. Examples could be enhancing customer onboarding, combating fraud, optimizing network traffic, and on and on. The global navigation, which you see up here, and the content sections below provide developers one-click access to our catalog. I'm going to go there in 1 minute. From the catalog, they're a click away from documentation pages. And once they're on those documentation pages, they're one click away from the ability to request access to APIs and pages to obtain credentials once they've been granted access. The newly released APIs on our portal appear here in a scrollable gallery. I'm just kind of scrolling through it right now. And I can here or above on some of the calls to action or in the navigation, I can click into the catalog. So I'm doing that now. So in the catalog, there's two displays. I'm going to change to the list view from the card view, which is the default view. Both organize APIs into primary capability-focused categories. We have a filter menu up here to the left, and that allows me to sort by primary category. I can also sort by keyword. As you can see, I've been doing that a bit. The card here that I'm showing is the quality of service API. You can see 3 stars and something called the maturity level. This was discussed in day 1 of our 2-part series on the API First platform. So the maturity level is a reflection of how closely an API adheres to documentation quality standards. API First provides a command line interface tool, and that analyzes both the API source code to quantify how well defined an API is by our governance standards, but also the levels of required and optional documentation. And because we're API First, we expose APIs for the hub to get and render these maturity levels dynamically on the portal. What's next for the catalog? I'm excited to announce that we're planning on introducing secondary governance categories. So for example, in the cloud category, something like device onboarding, for example. Also product associations. So what I mean by that is I'm going to go over to our external API hub just to show you a visual. So something like network as a service cloud management, having a bespoke overview page, you can see this here, but also being able to group APIs that are associated with that product. And then when I'm in the documentation of any of those APIs, I have that link back to the parent product. So here's a UI where I'd be able to go back to any of those APIs that I was just showing you. But also I have sort of the grounding of what product these APIs are associated with at any time in the documentation section. So clicking on a card, any card will launch the API's documentation overview page. So as the quality of service API demonstrates, we provide producers up to 10 pages to document the business value of their APIs to help expedite its utilization. The overview supports several subsections. The first one is about this API. That's typically a summary for the API and an explanation of its features and benefits. In this example, it talks about how QoS optimizes network traffic to ensure service reliability. It talks about features, including traffic classification and prioritization, bandwidth and latency controls, and other aspects of the API. In the prerequisites section, this is where approvals needed to use an API can be documented. Typically, that means a client ID and a client secret. Both are global API First requirements. And for QoS, a signed legal agreement is required. In the access notes section, this is typically a home for detailed instructions on how to gain API access. We follow the industry standard OAuth 2.0 framework for authorization. The usage guide, that gives API owners space to provide real-world examples of how the API can be used. QoS does this well by talking about a virtual music collaboration solution. They can also add in the diagram section couple of different diagrams. Like in this case, we have a sequence diagram for endpoint utilization. There's also architecture diagrams for client-server interactions. Now, at this point, developers that have gotten down here in a linear fashion, if they're keen to shift from the theoretical to the empirical, they can look no further than the API reference section. And in there, they'll find the HTTP methods to make secure requests to interact with data. And equally important, the expected call and response samples, which they can click and copy at any time. Developers can click through any of these interactive code snippets, and we've done this all in a native UI, so it has a Verizon look and feel. We hope that developers find the Hub's React Native UI makes it easier for them to grasp API syntax, endpoints, and parameters. We welcome feedback and are excited to share what's next for API documentation. A few things I want to call out are SDK downloads, so software development kits. So right now, what I can do here is I can download the API specification file as a JSON file, but I don't have a way, if I program in TypeScript, for example, of getting that as an SDK that I can plug and play into my application code base. So we're introducing functionality soon in order to do that. TypeScript is one of the languages we want to support, as well as Java and Python. Definitely welcome feedback from developers here on any other languages we should include. We're also going to be introducing, if you see up here, there's a create an app call to action. We're going to be introducing a way for you to request access to more than one API in a single request versus having to do that in a more repeated, one-to-one manner. And then API to product association. So that was basically like the NAS CM example I was showing from the external hub. If you're wondering how all of this data appears as HTML, well, there's a couple answers to that. The API reference content that I was showing, all of these interactive code snippets, these are from the API's YAML file. So that's a human readable data serialization language. It stands for yet another markdown language. Not the best title in the world, but a very common language. The rest of the API section is all content from markdown files. So we talked about this in the first session a bit, but Markdown, in case you're not familiar with it, is a lightweight markup language, and it describes how text should look in documents and on web pages. In the appendix of the slides I was showing earlier, there's a slide on how the hubs retrieve and render markdown files from our shared cloud storage service. That's integrated at runtime with our CI/CD pipeline. We use a markdown extension, MDX, and that enables user docs files to be rendered directly as HTML on these pages I was showing you. As you would expect by our team's moniker, this automation is enabled by backend APIs. And before I click out of here, just want to call out, we have the ability and some sections I didn't show for troubleshooting. So error codes and their causes and resolutions be included, a glossary for terms and conditions that might appear throughout the documentation, and then support resources. That section you can, if you have an owner's name and email address you want to include, you can add that, plus a Slack channel for developers to reach out. API usage, if I was on that QoS page, for example, and that was an API I was interested in potentially integrating into my own application or service, I would do that here in the create an app page. I just filled this out for your benefit so you can see what it looks like in the completed state. But this is me wanting to request access to our vast applications information API. And I just provided an explanation of why I want access to it, the context in which I'm going to potentially use it, and my expected call volume, just so the producer has that and can make a decision on whether or not to grant me access. I would then submit that, and I would go over here in my apps, and I would see, now if that request was still pending, that state wouldn't say approved, it would say pending. The other day, I requested access to an API, and I was granted access. So in here, I can click on my key and secret. I can copy those. I want to get out of there quickly because I'm not supposed to show that. And then I now have that key in use. I have up to 5 of these that I can rotate in. Like if I maybe lost it or it was compromised for some reason, I could request another one. We provide detailed instructions for how to get access. So what I was just showing you, the key and secret, we have a guide here for integrating that into request to us and making that call, and then the expected response. So doing that, you would get what we call, through that authorization grant request, you would get an access token. And that is what you would put in your response, in your request back to us. And that would grant you authorization to use the API. So developers are already going through this flow, but this is how you do it today in the hub. A few other services I just wanted to call out. We have integrated with a shared service desk for a support page. So in here, if I have an issue with or an improvement on a specific API, I can select that API, and this request, along with my message, will go directly to the owner of that API. I can also, as you saw in the UI, there's a few other types of requests I can send. So if I have a feature, an improvement for the hub team to consider, obviously a problem using the site or just can't find what I'm looking for, I can log that here too. We also have in the resources section, I was showing the access and management guide, but we have release notes and a blog for thought leadership. And I'm going to go back to the slides. So near the beginning of my demo, I touched on how API cards like the QoS one bridge the path from discovery to evaluation. I think cards are also a really good example of API first focus on automation, integration, and synchronization. So automation is achieved when APIs are registered via the producer portal, which was demoed in the previous session. That's when an API's display name and short description are generated. This metadata is stored in our cloud storage databases. Whenever that's updated, we return it to the API hub, which renders it in this UI. The integration with the platform does not stop there. API registration triggers a workflow in which we associate an API with a capability-oriented category and icon that connotes that category. The synchronization of this data is managed by our governance and product teams. It starts with the capability maps, data model, and taxonomy, and that funnels down to the hubs that I was showing you to help teams find reusable capabilities there.